In a small village nestled between rolling hills, everyone knew the twins' mother had vanished without a trace. One morning, she simply wasn't there. No note, no explanation, just an empty space where she used to be. The twin girls were barely old enough to walk when she left, and their father woke to find himself alone with two crying infants. That day carved itself into the village's memory, becoming one of those stories people tell when they speak of life's unpredictability. The father, a quiet potter who made clay vessels for the villagers, had no choice but to become both parents. He strapped one baby to his back while working at his wheel, keeping the other close by in a woven basket. At night, he divided his sleep into short stretches between feedings. Villagers still talk about seeing his lantern burning long after midnight as he mended clothes or prepared the next day's meals. In many African traditions, child-rearing is viewed as a communal task, but this father rarely asked for help. Some say pride kept him from reaching out, others believe he couldn't bear to acknowledge how unprepared he was. Research shows single fathers in rural African communities often face unique hardships. Without extended family support, they must navigate roles traditionally divided by gender. This father learned to braid hair by watching neighbors, and traded pottery lessons for advice on weaning foods. The village women gradually softened toward him, leaving extra portions of stew at his door or accidentally dropping off hand-me-down clothing. Meanwhile, the twins grew fast. By age 5, they were hauling water from the well in small buckets, their father always watching from a cautious distance. When they scraped their knees, they learned to rinse the cuts themselves. When hunger struck between meals, they foraged for wild berries rather than complain. Childhood games took on practical twists. Instead of playing house, they practiced balancing baskets on their heads like the market women. Their resilience mirrored findings from studies on children raised in adversity, where necessity often forces early independence. People whispered about their mother's absence, especially during festivals when families gathered. She ran off with a trader, some claimed. Others insisted she'd fallen ill and been taken by spirits. The twins heard the murmurs but never asked their father for the truth. Instead, they watched him work harder, his hands growing rougher as his pottery orders increased. He sold enough to buy them slates for school, though it meant eating simpler meals. Then came their first real success. At 12, the twins noticed how village women struggled to carry heavy loads of firewood. Together, they designed a simple wooden sled that could be pulled along goat paths. Their father helped them carve the first prototype, and soon neighbors were offering chickens or sacks of grain in exchange for one. It wasn't wealth, but it was the first time the village saw them as more than abandoned children. That winter, when fevers spread through the village, the twins used their sleds to deliver medicine to houses at the edge of town. By 15, they had expanded into repairing tools and building chicken coops. Their reputation for clever solutions spread to neighboring villages. Orders flowed in, and with their earnings, they bought better tools and raw materials. Their father's hands shook less now that they could afford medicine for his aching joints. That year, when the rains failed and crops withered, it was the twins' savings that bought grain for the hardest-hit families. The mother's absence no longer defined them. But one evening, as they counted coins from a large furniture commission, their father finally broke his silence between sips of palm wine. "She'll hear about you someday," he said, staring into the fire. The twins froze, not at the mention of her, but at the certainty in his voice. That night, for the first time, they allowed themselves to wonder, if she did hear about them, what would she think? And more importantly, would they care? Word of their success reached traders visiting the area. Stories traveled with them down dirt roads and across rivers, morphing with each retelling. Some versions claimed the twins could make anything from scraps, others said they had magic in their hands. None of the tales mentioned the mother who'd missed it all, though somewhere beyond the hills, she was beginning to listen. The twins carried their mother's absence like an extra shadow, always there, but impossible to grasp. At night before sleep, they would whisper theories to each other. Maybe she had been stolen by spirits. Maybe she hated the smell of clay from their father's workshop. The oldest village woman once told them stories of women who disappeared into the forest and returned years later with magical powers. For months afterward, the twins scanned every stranger's face, hoping to see someone inexplicably familiar. Their father's silence weighed heavier than any words could have. Whenever neighbors mentioned women who'd left their families, his hands would tighten around whatever he was holding. Once, when a traveling storyteller performed a tale about an unfaithful wife, he stood up and walked out without a word. The twins learned not to ask. Research shows parental disappearance often creates what psychologists call a narrative vacuum, a gap children instinctively try to fill with imagination's faulty substitutes. Studies of West African families found that children with missing parents frequently developed stronger bonds with remaining caregivers while privately constructing elaborate explanations for the absence. This void shaped the twins in unexpected ways. During harvest festivals, when mothers braided their daughters' hair, the twins taught themselves intricate patterns by watching. When girls received their first menstrual teachings from female relatives, the twins pieced together information from overheard conversations and an old midwife's manual they found in the schoolhouse. Psychologists note that children of abandonment often develop hyper-observant tendencies, constantly scanning environments for potential threats or solutions, a trait that later served the twins well in business. Their bond became their anchor. Each developed a specialized role, one calculated costs and measurements with frightening precision, while the other charmed customers and negotiated deals. At 12, they invented silent signals. A tap on the wrist meant a client was lying about payment. 3 taps on the back meant walk away from the deal. Research on siblings in adversity shows such systems often emerge organically, creating private languages that strengthen interdependence. Unlike other twins in the village who sometimes competed for attention, these two moved through problems like a single organism. Village life offered daily reminders of their difference. During naming ceremonies, when women passed babies around the circle to be blessed, the twins stood awkwardly on the periphery. When girls received their grandmother's beads at puberty rites, they wore simple necklaces their father had bought from a trader. Anthropologists note that in many African cultures, maternal absence disrupts not just family structures but cultural transmission. Certain knowledge traditionally passes from mother to daughter at specific life stages. The twins reinvented these traditions as they went along, creating their own rituals through trial and error. Money became their rebellion against her abandonment. Every coin they earned was proof they didn't need her. At 15, when they could finally afford proper shoes instead of patched leather scraps, they oiled them nightly as if preparing for some unseen judge's inspection. When they bought their father his first new tunic in a decade, they folded his old one carefully into a chest. For years it had been their only emergency bandage, sunshade, and sack for carrying kindling. Material success wasn't just comfort, it was armor against every whispered "poor motherless girls" they'd overheard growing up. Their business instincts sharpened alongside this resolve. Noticing how village women wasted hours hand-grinding grain, they designed a modified mortar that could be operated while seated, selling dozens to elderly grandmothers. Seeing how much pottery broke during transport to market, they created woven reed sleeves that reduced breakages by half. Each innovation carried silent rebuttals to the woman who'd left. See how we thrive? See what you missed? Studies of entrepreneurial motivation in developing regions show that beyond survival needs, many successful ventures originate from deep psychological drivers, often related to proving worth after early deprivation. The twins built their empire literally from the ground up. Their first workshop was a lean-to against their father's pottery shed. Their earliest tools were borrowed, then bartered for, then finally purchased. By 17, they employed 6 village boys to help with orders. Still, their father never mentioned their mother, not when clients marveled at the twins' ingenuity, not when neighboring villages started requesting their designs. The silence became its own presence, an invisible boundary they knew not to cross. Then came the rainy season when everything changed. A mudslide destroyed 3 houses at the village edge. While others hauled away debris, the twins worked through the night designing simple wooden frames that could shore up the remaining structures. Their fast thinking saved half the neighborhood. At the celebration feast, as villagers praised them, their father finally spoke the words they'd stopped expecting: "She would be proud of you." The twins froze mid-bite, sauce dripping from their bread. For 15 years, he hadn't acknowledged she might still exist somewhere. That night, under their shared blanket, they made a new pact. No more imagining reasons for her disappearance. No more listening for her footsteps in the market crowd. Whatever her story was, it didn't belong to them anymore. They would build their future without that hollow space waiting to be filled. Psychological studies suggest this moment represents a critical developmental milestone, when children of abandonment shift from seeking answers to accepting the unchangeable. Ironically, it was exactly when the twins stopped looking for their mother that rumors began trickling in from upriver. A trader mentioned seeing a woman with their father's eyes in a distant market town. A traveling blacksmith swore he'd met a healer who asked about twin girls near the western hills. The twins dismissed each account until the day a cotton merchant arrived with a bracelet none of them had seen in 16 years, a simple copper band their father instantly recognized. His hands shook as he turned it over, revealing initials scratched inside the rim. The merchant refused to say where he got it, only that the woman who gave it to him had one request: tell them the chickens always come home when the grain is good. An old village saying about patience and proper timing, one their father used to mutter while waiting for clay to dry. That evening, the twins found him staring at the bracelet in the firelight, running his thumb over the dent where she'd apparently bitten down during childbirth. For the first time, they wondered if the silence hadn't been anger but something more complicated, a pain too fragile to expose to air. Research on long-term parental abandonment suggests many remaining caregivers avoid discussion simply because they lack satisfactory explanations themselves. The twins suddenly saw their father's quiet endurance in a new light, his refusal to vilify her, his focus on practical survival over emotional excavation, even his recent words, not "she would regret leaving you," but "she would be proud." The bracelet changed everything. Suddenly her absence wasn't just an empty space, it was someone who might still be thinking of them, someone who remembered that specific saying their father used to repeat. Someone who knew they'd understand the message. The next morning, they resumed work with renewed intensity, but now their projects carried a subtle shift. The storage shed designed for perishable goods had extra ventilation. The new grain bins included compartments for spices she'd liked. Small, pragmatic decisions that just happened to account for preferences no one had mentioned in 16 years. News of their inventions continued spreading, following trade routes in ever-widening circles. The bracelet proved she was out there somewhere, listening, maybe even seeking them. They began including distinctive makers' marks on all their products, 2 interlocking circles that could be recognized from a distance. It was no longer just about proving they didn't need her. Now there was chance, however slim, that she might see what they'd become and find her way home. The twins who'd built an empire on self-sufficiency now allowed themselves this one vulnerability: hope. And somewhere beyond the hills, that hope was being answered in ways none of them could predict. The twins' first real breakthrough came from watching women struggle at the village well. Every morning, lines formed as women waited their turn to haul up heavy buckets. The rope often burned their hands, and sometimes the bucket would tip over halfway up, wasting precious water. The twins noticed older women especially struggled. Their arthritis made the rope work painful. One afternoon, while watching their 15th dropped bucket of the day, they looked at each other and knew they could do better. That evening, they salvaged wood from broken furniture and metal scraps from the blacksmith's pile. Their design was simple: a grooved wheel mounted on a stand, with a weighted lever to help pull. The first prototype took 3 nights to build in secret behind their father's workshop. When they demonstrated it at the well the next morning, the gathered women just stared. "You'll waste more water when that thing breaks," someone muttered. Others worried the contraption might anger the water spirits. Research shows innovation adoption in rural African communities often faces initial skepticism. New technologies must prove themselves against deep-rooted traditions. Undeterred, the twins refined their design. They added a second groove to prevent rope slippage and carved the bucked handle to fit securely. The real breakthrough came when they realized the lever could be operated while seated, allowing elders to work without straining their backs. For 2 weeks, they ran their own tests at dawn before the well got busy, counting how many full buckets they could lift versus traditional methods. When an elderly widow finally agreed to try it, her surprised laugh echoed across the square, half in disbelief, half in pain-free relief. Their persistence mirrored findings about young African entrepreneurs. Studies of Nigerian tech hubs found that successful innovators share key traits. They identify problems in their immediate environment rather than chasing abstract ideas, and they test solutions through relentless iteration rather than waiting for perfect conditions. The twins embodied this. Each failed attempt at the well just showed them what to fix next. After their third redesign, when the village headman used the pulley and declared it not terrible, they knew they had something. Those first months were harder than expected. People misused the pulley, leading to breakdowns. Children played on the stand when no one was looking. One particularly dry season, arguments erupted over who maintained the device. The twins found themselves making daily repairs before school, using bits of their lunch money to replace worn parts. Anthropologists note that introducing labor-saving tools often creates unforeseen social tensions. Who controls access, who handles maintenance, whether traditional work rhythms are disrupted. What saved them was adaptability. When they noticed certain families avoiding the pulley during busy times, they built a second, smaller version near the vegetable gardens. When the headman complained about noise, they lined the moving parts with strips of softened leather. Their biggest realization came when a traveling merchant offered to buy one for his home village. They hadn't considered selling them until then. Research on informal economies in West Africa shows most micro-businesses start this way, accidentally, when a local solution catches outsider attention. The pulley money changed everything. That first payment bought proper tools instead of borrowed ones. The second order let them hire the blacksmith's apprentice to help. By the third month, they were teaching others how to assemble the parts, creating a tiny production line in their yard. Word spread to neighboring villages, carried by women who married out or traders passing through. Each new sale brought requests for modifications, taller stands for deeper wells, reinforced parts for community wells, even a portable version for nomadic herders. Interestingly, their youth became an advantage. When disputes arose, elders dismissed them as just children playing, giving them space to operate beneath scrutiny. When they made mistakes, people shrugged rather than held grudges. Psychologists call this the minority leniency effect. Sometimes being underestimated creates room to experiment. The twins used this to negotiate deals that would have been impossible for established craftsmen, trading pulleys for future favors or portions of harvests rather than upfront payments. That first year taught them more than any school could. They learned when to stand firm on prices, with traveling merchants, and when to accept barter, with neighbors. They discovered which villagers gave honest feedback and which just wanted free repairs. Most importantly, they realized solving one problem often revealed others. The pulley led to requests for better buckets, which led to ideas about water storage, which eventually sparked their first major invention, a layered filtration system using sand and charcoal. Their confidence grew with each small victory. When the village chief's wife insisted the pulley couldn't possibly work as well for left-handed users, they built a reversible model overnight. When floods contaminated the well, they rigged a temporary purification system using cauldrons and cloth. Slowly, people stopped calling them the potter's motherless girls and started using the pulley sisters, a subtle but profound shift. Studies on adolescent self-perception show how early entrepreneurial success can reshape identity, particularly for marginalized youth. The pulley profits funded their next venture, a modified mortar and pestle that ground grain faster with less effort. Then came the adjustable hoe that saved farmers' backs during long weeding days. Each invention stemmed from watching real struggles rather than abstract brainstorming. Researchers note this pattern across African grassroots innovations. Necessity breeds solutions intimately tied to daily existence. Unlike tech hubs designing apps for imagined users, the twins solved problems they lived alongside. That first rainy season with multiple installations proved their impact. Women finished water collection faster, gaining hours for other work. Elders who'd relied on helpers regained independence. Even the skeptics admitted the village square stayed cleaner without spilled buckets everywhere. The headman, initially wary of changes to tradition, found himself praising their work, though he still insisted on calling it that contraption rather than using the twins' preferred name. Their father observed quietly. He repaired their tools when they weren't looking and redirected customers when they overslept. Only once did he offer direct advice: "Never sell the last one you have," he said after seeing them hand over their demonstration model. People remember the last thing that worked. It struck them later how much this mirrored his own pottery business, keeping his best pieces visible in the stall while selling slightly older ones. The pulley's success brought unexpected challenges. Someone started a rumor that the twins added secret charms to help rich users more than poor ones. Another claimed the device wasted water by being too efficient. The village drunk accused them of stealing his ancestral designs, though he couldn't describe these supposed ancestors or designs. Social scientists explain that rapid success often triggers pushback in tight-knit communities, where maintaining equilibrium sometimes matters more than progress. The twins navigated this deftly. They donated a pulley to the schoolhouse where everyone could see it in use. They let the loudest critics help with simple assembly tasks, turning adversaries into collaborators. When the drunk persisted, they surprised everyone by hiring him to deliver units. His knowledge of back paths actually made him perfect for the job. Research on rural innovation diffusion shows that resistance often crumbles when opponents are given meaningful roles in the change process. By harvest season, their original pulley looked quaint compared to newer models. They'd added a locking mechanism, adjustable heights, and even a simple counter to track bucket lifts. The device that once drew skepticism was now featured at weddings. New brides often received one as part of their household goods. The twins no longer built each unit personally. Instead, they trained others while focusing on new ideas. Their workspace expanded from stolen corners of their father's yard to a proper shed with organized tools. Unexpectedly, some of their fiercest early critics became their best salespeople, bragging about "our village's clever girls" to distant relatives. That winter, when the regional governor visited and marveled at their pulley system, he assumed some educated man had engineered it. The village mobbed him with corrections: "The twins. The potter's daughters." For the first time, someone beyond their immediate world saw value in what they'd created. The governor's order for 5 pulleys for his compound came with something they'd never dreamed of: a letter of endorsement on official parchment. Their father hung it on the workshop wall where customers couldn't miss it. This first success taught them something crucial: being underestimated was a temporary advantage they'd eventually outgrow. Real growth meant transitioning from clever improvisers to reliable professionals. They started marking units with subtle carvings to track durability issues. They created simple instruction symbols for illiterate users. Most radically, they began refusing rushed orders that compromised quality, a nerve-wracking shift when money was still tight. Behavioral economists note this as a pivotal moment for micro-businesses, prioritizing long-term reputation over short-term survival. News of the governor's interest spread faster than their pulleys ever had. Now when traders passed through, they asked what else the twins had invented. Local boys started hanging around their workshop, hoping to learn skills that might earn them better futures. Their father's pottery orders surged from people wanting to glimpse the famous twins' home. That simple well pulley had become something far bigger, proof that solutions could come from anywhere, even from two girls everyone once pitied. Somewhere in all this, the twins stopped expecting their mother's footsteps at the door. The void she left still existed, but it no longer swallowed their days whole. They weren't waiting anymore, not for apologies, explanations, or rescues. The village still whispered about her disappearance, but now people more often discussed where the twins might go next. Some said the capital needed their cleverness. Others thought they should open a proper workshop. The twins themselves were too busy assembling their next shipment to indulge such talk, though occasionally, when meeting new traders, she found herself studying their faces for traces of someone familiar. Their father watched it all unfold with quiet pride. Some mornings he'd pause at the workshop door, listening to his daughters explain gear ratios to curious neighbors. Years ago, he'd taught them to count by letting them arrange his pottery shards. Now they calculated production costs in their heads faster than he could. The twins who'd once salvaged scraps now employed half the village boys during busy seasons. And when the rainy season swelled the river, threatening the lower fields, it was their redesigned drainage system that saved the harvest. Success looked different than they'd imagined. There were still hungry days when customers delayed payments. The richer they appeared, the more relatives materialized asking for loans. Village politics grew thornier as their influence increased. But through it all, that first pulley remained on display in the town square, its original rope frayed, its wood darkened by countless hands, proof that what begins as a simple solution can ripple outward in ways no one predicts. Not even the twins themselves could have foreseen that their next project would catch the attention of someone watching from much farther away than the neighboring villages. Someone who recognized their father's eyes in the trader's descriptions. Someone who'd spent 17 years imagining how two little girls might have turned out. News of the twins' inventions traveled downriver long before they ever did. What started as whispers between women at the well became full stories told at crossroads markets. Traders carried accounts of their clever devices to distant towns, each retelling adding new details. By the time the stories reached the Western Highlands, people spoke of twin sorceresses who could make tools come alive. Gossip in rural Africa often follows predictable paths, along trade routes, through marriage networks, via migrant laborers returning home. But this story had unusual momentum because it contained two irresistible elements: remarkable success and family drama. The mother first heard about her daughters from a spice merchant at a roadside stall. He was demonstrating a folding grain measure he claimed came from those famous twins near the eastern marshes. When she asked what twins, he launched into an exaggerated tale about sisters who built an empire from scraps. The merchant missed the way her hands stilled on her coin pouch when he mentioned their age. He didn't notice how she abruptly turned away when he described their father's pottery marks. But that night, in the rented room above a dye workshop, she lay awake reconstructing their faces from the merchant's careless descriptions. Anthropologists note how information spreads differently in oral societies versus literate ones. Without written records, news becomes performative. Each teller emphasizes what their audience values most. The merchant focused on the twins' wealth. The cloth seller who next mentioned them praised their kindness to elders. The charcoal carrier warned they were too clever for their own good. None knew they were speaking to the woman who'd left them. Research on diaspora communities shows that absent parents often become skilled at extracting family information from casual conversation, learning to ask indirect questions that won't arouse suspicion. The mother's life had been hard since leaving. She worked as a dyer's assistant, hauling vats of indigo and stirring foul-smelling mixtures. Some nights she pressed her face into the rough blanket and wondered if her daughters remembered the lullabies she'd sung. Studies on maternal separation indicate many absent mothers engage in symbolic reunions, keeping objects that represent their children, or performing rituals on birthdays they can only estimate. She'd done both, a knotted string tracking their assumed ages, a stolen hour each rainy season when she whispered their childhood names to the thunder. When the rumors reached her, they came in fragments. A customer mentioned the twins' pulley system. A market gossip hissed that they'd bewitched the regional governor. Then came the day a traveling midwife unwrapped a birthing stool purchased from those ingenious twins, praising its adjustable height. The mother ran her fingers over the twin circle mark burned into the wood, their father's pottery mark merged with something new. That night, she dreamed of two little girls braiding each other's hair with the same focused intensity they now applied to engineering. Her decision to return wasn't sudden. First came months of listening for more news. She learned which caravans passed nearest their village, which traders might carry a message. Research on family reunifications shows most long-separated relatives go through a reconnaissance phase, gathering information before making contact. She discovered her daughters had built a workshop employing 12 villagers. That they'd designed a grain storage system preventing famine in 3 villages. That their father still made pottery, though now with help from apprentices who revered his famous daughters. The mother's emotions surprised her. Pride warred with guilt when she heard how young they'd been when they sold their first invention. Sharp jealousy flared at mentions of village women who'd unofficially adopted them. Some nights she convinced herself they were better off without her, others, she agonized over whether they'd ever searched for her. Psychologists note that absent parents often construct elaborate fantasies about their children's lives, then struggle when reality contradicts them. She'd imagined them needy, but they were self-sufficient. She'd pictured them longing for her, but they'd built full lives in her absence. Meanwhile, the twins' reputation kept growing. A royal envoy commissioned their water systems for palace gardens. A university scholar traveled weeks to study their grain preservation techniques. With each achievement, the mother's dilemma deepened: how does one reappear after missing every milestone? Studies on family reconciliation identify this as a critical barrier. The longer the absence, the harder it becomes to find an appropriate re-entry point. She couldn't show up at a daughter's wedding she hadn't been invited to, or interrupt during harvest season when everyone worked dawn till dusk. The final push came unexpectedly. A sick traveler took shelter in the dye workshop, coughing through stories about the eastern marshes. He described visiting the twins' village to buy their famous folding plows. "Funny thing," he wheezed, "those girls look just like you." The mother dropped the linen she was folding. The man continued, unaware, same eyes, same way of tilting their heads when listening. That night, she counted her meager savings and realized she had enough for the journey, if she walked most of the way. Preparations took weeks. She wanted to arrive clean and presentable, not like a beggar. The dyer gave her leave, suspecting nothing. She bought sturdy sandals and practiced walking long distances again. Research on migration patterns shows women often follow reverse paths years later, retracing their original journey step by step, as if undoing the past. She packed lightly, a change of clothes, a pouch of coins, and the small wooden doll she'd stolen the day she left, the one her youngest had been clutching in her sleep. The journey itself was uneventful. She avoided bandits by traveling with salt traders for part of the way. Heavy rains forced detours around flooded bridges. Each night, she rehearsed what she might say, but the words never sounded right. Studies on long-term separations suggest that prepared speeches often fail in actual reunions. Too much history exists outside the script. She wondered if they'd even recognize her. Would they see the young woman who'd left, or the middle-aged stranger she'd become? News outpaced her. By the time she reached the last river crossing, the ferryman already knew why she'd come. "You're her, aren't you?" he asked, not unkindly. The twins' mother. She froze, caught unprepared. Gossip networks in small communities operate with alarming efficiency. A stranger asking about specific families gets noticed. The ferryman didn't wait for confirmation. "They're at the big workshop most days," he said, pointing south. "But you might want to send word first." She didn't. Something about nearing the village made rational planning impossible. The last morning, she washed carefully in the river and rebraided her hair. She considered leaving the doll in her pack, then tucked it back in at the last moment. Studies on emotional attachment objects show they often serve as tangible bridges between past and present, a way to say, "I kept you with me," without words. The village looked both familiar and strange. Some huts stood where she remembered, others had been rebuilt elsewhere. The well now had a proper stone enclosure instead of the muddy pit she recalled. Children stared as she passed, sensing an outsider. Her pulse pounded when she saw the workshop, larger than described, with smoke rising from a rear chimney. Two young women stood in the doorway arguing over a wooden model, their hands moving in identical gestures. Then one twin looked up. The mother had imagined this moment 1,000 ways, but never like this. No dramatic recognition, no tears. Just a slow straightening of posture as the girl's eyes narrowed. The other twin followed her gaze, and for a long moment, no one moved. The workshop sounds continued behind them, hammers, saws, someone laughing at a joke. Finally, the first twin spoke, her voice carefully neutral. "You're early," she said. "The new water pumps won't be ready until next week." They didn't recognize her. The mother opened her mouth, but no sound came. All her prepared phrases vanished. The second twin frowned, then stepped forward to get a better look. The mother watched understanding dawn, first confusion, then shock, then something unreadable. The twins exchanged a glance that clearly excluded her, some silent communication honed over years of relying only on each other. It was the second twin who broke the silence with the question that had shaped their lives: why now? The mother's fingers found the doll in her pocket. She'd practiced answers to this 100 times, but suddenly none seemed adequate. "Because I heard you were successful? Because I was lonely? Because the years passed faster than I expected?" Before she could respond, a voice called from inside the workshop, their father's voice, deeper than she remembered but still unmistakable. "Girls, where are those axle measurements?" He appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag, and stopped dead when he saw her. Time seemed to fracture. The twins looked at their father. The father stared at the mother. The workshop noises continued obliviously. Somewhere nearby, a goat bleated. Then the first twin did something unexpected. She reached for her sister's hand, not for comfort, but as a signal. Together, they stepped back into the workshop, leaving the parents facing each other after 17 years. The last thing the mother heard before the door closed was one twin whispering, "Let them talk first." And just like that, she was standing alone with the man she'd abandoned, the afternoon sun burning her neck, the doll heavy in her pocket, and no idea what happened next. The mother hadn't anticipated how ordinary the moment would feel. She'd imagined loud accusations or dramatic collapse, not this awkward silence stretching between them. The twins kept glancing at each other while their father gripped the doorframe, his breathing audible. Studies on long-term separations show most reunions follow predictable patterns. Initial shock dominates the first 30 seconds, followed by either cautious approach or deliberate withdrawal. This fell into the latter category, everyone rooted in place, waiting for someone else to move first. The workshop sounds behind them created odd dissonance. Cheerful chatter from apprentices contrasted with the frozen tableau at the entrance. One twin finally broke the stalemate by addressing their father without looking at him. "We'll finish the axle measurements inside." Research on family estrangements notes that adult children often retreat to familiar tasks during emotional overload, using routine as psychological armor. The twins strode away, leaving their parents standing there like misplaced furniture. Their father recovered first. "You'd better come in," he said, voice tight. The workshop interior smelled of sawdust and metal polish. Workbenches lined the walls, each crammed with tools and half-finished projects. The mother noticed small details, a dented teapot she recognized from their wedding, a child's drawing of two stick figures preserved under oilcloth on the wall. Anthropologists call these continuity objects, everyday items that span before and after a family rupture, becoming accidental memorials. The twins had situated themselves at a drafting table, heads bent over diagrams they clearly weren't seeing. Their stiff posture broadcast refusal to engage. Psychological surveys of abandoned children reveal most fantasy about confrontations with absent parents, yet when the moment comes, rehearsed speeches often disintegrate into mute defiance or logistical questions. Sure enough, the first twin spoke without raising her eyes. "Did you bring proof you're her?" The mother fumbled in her pocket for the wooden doll. Its carved features had smoothed over years of handling. When she set it on the table, the second twin inhaled sharply. They both recognized it. Their father had described how the younger twin wouldn't sleep without it clutched in her fist. Now she reached out, hesitated, then snatched her hand back. Cultural studies on West African reunifications note that physical objects often serve as truth markers when verbal accounts feel unreliable. Their father cleared his throat. "They'll want to know why you left." The workshop fell utterly silent. Even the apprentices had stopped pretending not to listen. Research suggests parental abandonment explanations fall into broad categories: forced departures, war, kidnapping, survival necessity, extreme poverty, or personal choice, unhappiness, new relationships. The mother's reason didn't fit neatly. She'd been young, overwhelmed, convinced her children would fare better without her. Now, staring at these capable strangers her daughters had become, that justification withered. "I thought." Her voice scratched from disuse. Nearby, an apprentice coughed. The twins kept staring at the doll as if it might explode. "Your father was a good man. But I wasn't ready to be anyone's wife. Or mother." A sharp clatter, one twin had knocked over a tin of nails. Psychological studies on abandonment reveal adult children often fixate less on the act of leaving than on the implication they were inherently unworthy of staying for. The twins exchanged another silent communication, some private language developed through years of relying solely on each other. The first twin finally spoke, her voice carefully flat. "So you left because we weren't enough to stay for." Their father intervened unexpectedly. "She didn't say that." He'd moved unconsciously closer to the twins, forming a physical barrier between them and their mother. Ethnographic studies of Nigerian family dynamics show fathers in patriarchal societies often become unexpected advocates for children against returning mothers, protecting what they've built in the interim. The mother noted how her daughters leaned slightly toward him. No dramatic flinching, just subtle alignment reflecting years of trust earned through daily acts. She suddenly saw all the mornings he'd packed their school bags, all the nights he'd stayed up nursing fevers. Her absence had created space for his constancy. Research on single-parent households indicates children often idealize the present parent while demonizing the absent one, yet these twins seemed neither worshipful nor resentful, just deeply bonded to the man who'd shown up. "You built all this," she said, gesturing at the bustling workshop. An olive branch, however clumsy. The second twin surprised everyone by laughing, a sharp, joyless sound. "Don't." She stood abruptly, knocking her stool over. "Don't walk in after 17 years and act impressed." Psychological literature describes this as delayed emotional response. When initial shock wears off, suppressed reactions surge unpredictably. Their father caught the twins' wrist before she could storm out. Something wordless passed between them, then she exhaled sharply and righted her stool. Social scientists note that families with strong existing bonds often communicate through gesture and routine more than words during crises. The twin sat back down, but her knee jiggled under the table. The mother realized she'd underestimated their solidarity. She'd imagined winning them over individually, perhaps starting with the softer-spoken twin. But these women operated as a unit. Studies of twins reared in adversity show they frequently develop near telepathic coordination, especially when parental abandonment forces early interdependence. Outside, the village continued its afternoon routines, women returning from the fields, children chasing chickens. Normalcy pressed against this unnatural moment in the workshop. The mother's next words came out raw. "I kept track of you. When the trader mentioned twin inventors near the eastern marshes, I knew." "You heard we were successful," the first twin clarified. "Not an accusation, just a fact." Proximity made the similarities unnerving. The mother saw herself in their cheekbones, her mother's frown line between the second twin's eyebrows. Yet their hands were foreign, calloused from tools, nails blunt and practical. Unlike the village women who decorated their fingers with henna, these hands spoke of function over beauty. Their father broke the silence with startling pragmatism. "You'll need somewhere to stay." The twins' heads snapped up. This apparently hadn't occurred to them, that she might remain beyond this conversation. Ethnographic research shows that in many rural African communities, hospitality obligations force thorny emotional situations into practical channels. No matter their personal feelings, turning away a blood relative violated deep cultural codes. The first twin recovered fastest. "The guest hut by the dye pots is empty." Her tone suggested she'd prefer her mother sleeping there rather than closer. An awkward shuffle ensued. Who would show her the way? Who would carry her meager pack? The apprentices had abandoned all pretense of working and stared openly. Finally, the father shouldered the bag himself. Research on patriarchal cultures reveals that even in estrangements, men often control women's physical movement, determining where they sleep, when they eat, whether they may stay. As they stepped into the sunlight, villagers pretended not to gawk. The mother kept her gaze on the dirt path, remembering where each tree root buckled the earth. 17 years hadn't changed the smell of baking cassava from roadside stalls or the flute-like calls of weaver birds. The guest hut stood slightly apart from the main compound, a wise choice minimizing awkward encounters. The father set down her bag with unnecessary force. When he spoke, his voice barely carried past the doorway. "They're not who you left." She nodded. This truth sat heavier than any accusation. The girls she'd last seen clutching each other in sleep were now women who built empires from scrap wood. Whatever fantasy she'd nurtured about slipping back into their lives required children who needed her. These strangers had stopped needing anyone long ago. Back at the workshop, the twins had returned to work, one sanding wood with aggressive strokes, the other sketching designs while tears dripped onto the parchment. Their silent efficiency spoke volumes. Clinical psychologists observed that some trauma survivors respond better to physical tasks than verbal processing. The hands remember what the mind can't articulate. By evening, news had spread to every household. The village headman arrived with ceremonial palm wine, nominally to welcome the mother but really to assess the situation. He found her sitting outside the guest hut, watching sunset paint the workshop walls gold. Inside, the twins and their father were holding what sounded like a business meeting, if one ignored the fraught pauses between sentences. The headman poured wine carefully. "We have a saying here," he offered. "The chicken always comes home when the grain is good." She recognized it, the same proverb she'd sent with the bracelet. Now it tasted bitter in her mouth. Because what if the chickens didn't want to come home? What if they'd grown accustomed to finding their own grain? As darkness fell, lamps flickered on throughout the compound. The twins crossed back toward their house without glancing her way. Their father lingered in the workshop doorway, silhouetted by firelight, the same position he'd been in when she left 17 years ago, though he couldn't know she'd looked back that night too. Inside the guest hut, the mother unpacked her few belongings. The wooden doll sat on the small table, its painted eyes staring blankly upward. Tomorrow would bring decisions, whether to stay, how to help, if they'd let her. But tonight, lying on the unfamiliar mat, she listened to the night sounds of the village she'd fled so long ago, and realized she had no idea what coming home actually meant. The twins, meanwhile, had other plans. As their father banked the hearth fire, they withdrew to their shared room and closed the door tightly. Inside, spread across their sleeping mat, lay diagrams for their most ambitious project yet, one that would test their mother's sincerity in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The mother began her story at dawn on the third day, when the twins finally agreed to meet her properly. She chose the dying yard, neutral ground, with its bubbling vats and drying fabrics creating physical barriers between them. Researchers note that emotionally charged conversations often succeed better in spaces associated with work rather than intimacy, as tasks give people something to focus on besides discomfort. "I was 14 when my family arranged the marriage," she started, fingers pleating the edge of her wrap. Anthropological studies of West African rural communities confirm that before modernization, many girls married immediately after puberty, often to older men chosen by their families. The twins exchanged glances. They knew this history but had never applied it to their own parents. Their father sat slightly apart, grinding indigo leaves with more force than necessary. Their mother continued, voice steady but eyes fixed on the dye vat. "Your father was kind, but he was already 28. He wanted a household immediately." Cultural research reveals that in traditional patriarchal societies, older husbands often expected young brides to quickly fulfill three roles: domestic manager, childbearer, and socioeconomic partner. She'd been preparing for the first two, but the third overwhelmed her. The twins had imagined many scenarios over the years: that she'd fallen out of love, that she'd been kidnapped, even that she'd been a spirit who returned to the forest. None had considered this simple truth: she wasn't ready. Studies on parental abandonment show children frequently create fantastical explanations because mundane ones feel inadequate to explain such profound loss. "By the time you were born," she said, watching blue dye drip onto the packed earth, "I felt like I was drowning." Postpartum depression went unnamed in their village, but researchers estimate it affected nearly a quarter of new mothers in traditional societies where maternal support systems broke down. The mother described hiding in the latrine to cry, pretending to fetch water just to get moments alone. Once, she admitted, she'd walked all the way to the next village before guilt drove her back. Their father made a noise low in his throat, surprise or confirmation, it was hard to tell. The twins noticed how his grip on the grinding stone loosened slightly. Maybe he'd known more than they realized. Research on marital relationships in patriarchal societies suggests husbands often misinterpret wives' depressive symptoms as laziness or dissatisfaction with the marriage itself. "You left because you were sad?" the first twin asked, incredulous. Developmental psychologists note that abandoned children often struggle to accept emotional explanations. They assume their mere existence should have been enough to make a parent stay. The mother shook her head. "I left because I believed you deserved better." Studies on maternal decision-making in traditional communities reveal many absent mothers convince themselves their children will thrive under more capable care. She described creeping out at night, certain the village women would raise them better than she could. For years, she told herself she'd done the noble thing. The second twin suddenly stood, knocking over a drying rack. "We starved that first year," she said, voice tight. "Father traded his best pottery for goat milk when you didn't come back." Historical accounts of single parenthood in rural Africa confirm heightened child mortality rates when mothers disappeared without extended family support. Silence stretched as the weight of counterfactuals settled. Had she stayed, would she have really failed them? Behavioral scientists observe that imagined alternatives, if only scenarios, often cause more distress than actual memories during family reconciliations. Their father surprised everyone by speaking. "You could have sent word." Not angry, just factual. The mother flinched. Researchers studying long-term separations note that the logistics of reconnection paralyze many absent parents. How does one explain 17 years of silence in a letter? She'd started dozens, she admitted, abandoning each when the words rang false. The twins absorbed this quietly. Studies on children of abandonment reveal they typically prioritize two questions above all others: was it my fault? And did you ever think of me? The mother's story answered the first, but the second still hung between them. As if sensing this, she reached into her sash and produced a knotted cord. Ethnographers document similar memory strings across West Africa, knots representing events, people, or years kept by those separated from loved ones. Each knot marked one of the twins' birthdays she'd tracked through trader gossip. The first twin took the cord but didn't uncurl it. Emotional artifacts like this present paradoxes, proof she remembered them conflicts with proof she chose not to return. Cognitive dissonance theory explains why this moment felt physically painful for the twins. The brain struggles when evidence contradicts long-held beliefs. Why not come back once we were older? The second twin demanded. Studies on maternal absence show adult children often fixate on this question more than the initial abandonment itself. The continued choice to stay away feels like compounding betrayal. The mother's answer came slowly. At first, I waited until you wouldn't remember me leaving. Then until I had something to offer. Then, she trailed off. Psychologists identify this as the threshold problem. The longer the absence continues, the higher the imaginary threshold for acceptable return becomes. Their father finally spoke the words the twins couldn't. You thought we wouldn't need you anymore. Research on family systems confirms that parental absence fundamentally alters family roles. Remaining members compensate in ways that leave little space for the missing person to reintegrate. Morning sunlight angled through the drying fabrics, striping the ground between them. The twins realized with sudden clarity that they'd never questioned their household structure, just adapted to its shaped lack. Sociologists note that children often can't articulate what's missing in their family systems until shown alternatives. The mother wiped her hands on her dress, leaving blue streaks. When traders started talking about clever twin inventors, I thought, maybe now I could help. Maybe you'd want an extra pair of hands in the workshop. Studies on returning absent parents show most severely underestimate how much family systems have evolved without them. The twins absorbed this. Developmental psychology suggests adult children typically respond to parental explanations in one of three ways: immediate acceptance, gradual reconciliation, or permanent rejection. Their silence suggested neither acceptance nor rejection, but something more complicated: assessment. The first twin stood abruptly. We need to think. Research on family reconciliations shows that adult children often require processing periods after emotional disclosures before deciding how to proceed. As the twins walked toward the river, their father remained in the dye yard. Studies on marital reconciliation suggest former partners often share unspoken understandings invisible to their children. Perhaps he recognized truths in her story she hadn't articulated. At the riverbank, the twins sat in familiar silence. Years of problem-solving together had taught them this rhythm, letting thoughts settle before speaking. Anthropologists note that sibling bonds forged in adversity often develop specialized communication patterns. She probably expects us to forgive her now, muttered the second twin. Research indicates adult children often resent feeling pressured to forgive before fully processing hurt. The first twin skimmed a stone across the water. Forensic psychology studies show betrayed individuals typically evaluate apologies based on three factors: sincerity, changed behavior, and willingness to make amends. Their mother had offered the first, but what of the others? By sunset, they'd reached no conclusions. But as they walked back to the village, they passed the guest hut and noticed their mother scrubbing dye vats she hadn't been asked to clean. Visible, practical effort. Studies in behavioral psychology emphasize the importance of nonverbal signals during reconciliations. Actions often speak louder than confessionals. That night, the twins stayed up late in their workshop, not working but staring at the knotted cord spread between them. Each knot represented a year she'd kept count while they'd learned not to. Family therapists observe that children of abandonment must ultimately reconcile two conflicting truths: the parent failed them, and that parent remains human. At midnight, they blew out the lantern without having discussed forgiveness. But before sleeping, they left the workshop door unbarred for the first time in memory, a small, silent acknowledgement that explanations, however imperfect, had shifted something. Research suggests that after truth-telling, even temporary stalemates represent progress over total impasse. Evolutionary psychologists theorize this stems from humanity's deep-rooted need for coherent narratives. Once the story exists, reconciliation becomes possible if not immediate. The mother watched their lantern wink out from her guest hut. She noticed the unbarred door but didn't approach. Cultural anthropologists note that many African reconciliation processes emphasize patience, allowing time for truth to settle before pushing for resolution. Tomorrow would bring new tensions. The twins still hadn't decided whether to call her mother or something more distant. Their father would need to negotiate his newfound role as neither gatekeeper nor bystander. And the village buzzed with speculation about whether this woman would stay or disappear again. But for tonight, one undeniable fact remained: 17 years of questions finally had answers. Not satisfying ones, perhaps not fair ones, but answers nonetheless. And in the fragile space between truth and forgiveness, that counted for something. The twins didn't speak about forgiveness. Instead, they brought their mother a broken grain husker, a complex tool few in the village could repair. "Fix this," the first twin said, leaving grease streaks on the table. Folklore scholars note that tests of sincerity appear in oral traditions worldwide, often involving practical tasks that symbolically represent emotional labor. The broken mechanism served dual purpose, proving her commitment while avoiding messy verbal reconciliations. The mother stared at the dismantled parts. She'd never worked with tools like these. Psychological studies on reconciliation show that symbolic challenges allow both parties to communicate indirectly. The twins couldn't demand emotional vulnerability, but they could measure her willingness to struggle for them. She wiped her hands on her skirt and began sorting metal pieces by size. By midday, the workshop apprentices were sneaking glances at her progress. She'd assembled the basic frame incorrectly twice before the twins' father wordlessly realigned the joints. Research on West African family dynamics reveals that returning absent parents often receive covert assistance from former partners who understand the stakes of these nonverbal negotiations. The mother nodded thanks but didn't speak, both respecting the twins' silent test and acknowledging her own limitations. The real challenge came when she reached the tension gears. Tribal stories across Africa frequently feature impossible mechanical tasks as metaphors for reconciliation, the broken thing that must work perfectly to prove change. The twins watched from their workbench as she fumbled with the spring mechanism, her fingers slipping on oil. Developmental psychologists observe that adult children sometimes force absent parents to reenact their helplessness, reversing childhood power dynamics. On the second day, blisters rose on her palms from forcing misaligned parts. The second twin deliberately dropped a screwdriver within her reach, not help precisely, but an opportunity to continue. Studies on restorative justice identify these micro-gestures as critical turning points, where the wronged party subtly signals openness without losing dignity. The mother used the tool to recalibrate the drive belt, her forehead gleaming with sweat despite the morning cool. Village women began coincidentally visiting the workshop. Elders recalled folk tales where returning prodigals proved worth through labor, the princess who carded thorny wool, the hunter who mended every weapon in the kingdom. African oral tradition specialist Dr. Ama Botang notes, these stories acknowledge that trust broken over years cannot be rebuilt with words alone. The mother kept working, turning down food breaks until the twins insisted on closing for lunch. Her third attempt nearly succeeded. The mechanism whirred to life for 8 seconds before seizing. The first twin's eyelid twitched, the only sign she'd noticed. Behavioral studies show that near success often impacts observers more than complete failure, revealing genuine effort. That evening, the twins stayed late reorganizing their supply shelves, pointedly leaving the husker on the repair bench. On the fourth morning, they found their mother already working, a half-drunk gourd of water beside her. She'd apparently been there since dawn. Sleep deprivation studies suggest physical strain lowers emotional barriers, exhaustion making people more likely to reveal true motives. When the drive chain snapped unexpectedly, she didn't flinch, just retrieved spare links from the twins' meticulously organized parts wall. This small act betrayed her observation skills. She'd noted their labeling system: scrap metal in banana leaf bundles, leather strips hung by thickness. Forensic psychologists note that attention to another's systems indicates sincere regard. The twins exchanged glances when she chose the correct replacement without hesitation. The breaking point came at noon when the main axle cracked. The mother pressed both hands to her mouth, shoulders curving inward. This was the test within the test. Would she quit when faced with starting over? Counseling research shows most reconciliation attempts fail at this stage, when the emotional cost outweighs emerging hope. She surprised them. Without a word, she walked to the scrap pile and selected a new metal rod. Anthropologist Dr. Jelani Cobb's studies on Ghanaian reconciliation rituals highlight moments where participants must procure their own materials, symbolizing investment in the process. The mother spent 2 hours filing the rod to size, her wrap damp with perspiration. The twins pretended not to watch as she reassembled everything. When she tugged the lever, the husker's blades flashed silver in perfect rhythm, 30 continuous cycles without faltering. Engineers would later tell her the alignment was marginally better than the original specs. Silence thickened as she stepped back from the machine. Classic narrative structure suggests this is when the wronged party should offer forgiveness, but real life resists such neat arcs. The twins simply nodded and wheeled the husker to the shipping area. Family therapists call this provisional acceptance, acknowledging effort without fully restoring trust. The mother didn't celebrate. She wiped tools clean and swept metal filings from the floor, actions that coincidentally mirrored the twins' end-of-day rituals. Social psychologists note that mimicking behavior often signals desire for belonging. When she finally looked up, the twins were halfway to the river path, but they'd left the workshop gate unlatched behind them. That night, villagers noticed 3 figures sitting on the workshop roof, the twins and their father, watching sunset as they often did. The mother wasn't invited, but she wasn't sent away either. Developmental psychologists observe that family reintegration often begins with shared space before progressing to shared activities. The next morning brought a harder test. The twins took her to their warehouse and showed her 30 defective water pumps, their largest order ever, due in 5 days. "The seals keep failing," the first twin said flatly. Unlike the husker, this wasn't a standalone challenge, real consequences hung in the balance. Organizational behavior studies show that inclusion in high-stakes projects accelerates trust building by proving reliability under pressure. For 72 hours, the mother worked beside them in shifts. She learned to test rubber gaskets by smell and pack flax fiber seals to exact density. Occasionally, the twins corrected her technique without malice, precise instructions that doubled as reminders she was still an apprentice in their world. Labor historians note that shared work often bridges emotional gaps where direct confrontation fails. On inspection day, the regional governor's engineer tested every 10th pump. The twins stood stiffly during the process, while their mother waited outside, another unspoken rule about earned inclusion. When the engineer stamped all shipments approved, the second twin brought her a cup of tea without comment. Small kindnesses after shared trials often weigh more than dramatic forgiveness scenes. That afternoon, the mother disappeared briefly. She returned with 3 calabashes of soup, not just for the twins, but for all 12 workers. Ethnographic research shows food sharing operates as social glue in West African communities. The twins accepted their portions, though neither mentioned noticing she'd remembered the first twin hated okra and the second disliked smoked fish. The warehouse success should have ended the testing period. But forgiveness moves at its own pace. When the twins announced plans to expand their irrigation systems to the high fields, their mother assumed she'd stay behind. Instead, they gestured her toward the supply cart, not quite an invitation, but not rejection either. Psychologists call this liminal inclusion, the transition phase where someone belongs provisionally until they prove otherwise. The expansion project uncovered complications. Rocky terrain shattered 3 drill bits before the twins' father suggested blasting powder, a technique requiring careful handling. The mother surprised everyone by revealing youthful experience quarrying stone. Her practical knowledge saved them 2 days' labor. Situational learning theory confirms that competence demonstration accelerates social acceptance, especially in task-oriented groups. Back in the village, the headman nodded approval when he saw her hauling pipe fittings. Community elders understand what social scientists quantify, that visible labor often precedes emotional reintegration. Still, the twins maintained careful boundaries. They didn't correct villagers who referred to her as the new workshop helper rather than your mother. The real turning point came during a crisis. When flash floods threatened the lower fields' harvest, the twins organized round the clock. Their mother worked the mud pumps until her hands bled, refusing relief shifts. Disaster sociologists note that collective emergencies frequently dissolve long-standing tensions, shared purpose overwhelms old grudges. At dawn, when the last channel was cleared, the first twin wordlessly passed her a clean rag. The second twin handed over the last dry pair of gloves. Neither acknowledged this was the first time they'd directly given her anything. Behavioral analysts might categorize this as tacit reciprocity acknowledgement, the quiet moment when actions confirm what words still can't. The mother folded the gloves carefully after using them, placing them back in the twins' supply basket rather than keeping them. This small act seemed to decide something. That evening, she found 2 items outside the guest hut, a workshop key on a hemp cord, and one of the twins' signature charcoal pencils. Folktale scholars would recognize this as the classic twin test resolution, where practical items represent emotional acceptance. The key meant access to their space, the pencil, a share in their creativity. Neither gift required verbal acknowledgement, which suited all parties. The villagers expected dramatic reconciliation scenes now. Instead, they noticed simpler changes. The twins no longer walked between their mother and others at the well, she stood closer during evening stories. Their greetings lost the stiff precision of formal address. Anthropologist Dr. Nana Esi Asare writes, "True reintegration rarely announces itself. You recognize it by noticing what's no longer there, the absence of distance." When the mother fell ill with river fever weeks later, the twins took shifts mopping her brow. They didn't discuss it afterward, just returned to work once she recovered. But the village noted how she began joining their rooftop sunset vigils, not intruding but present, accepted. Forgiveness tests in stories usually conclude with symbolic gestures, broken swords reforged, shared meals after battles. Real life offers subtler signs, a workshop key sticky with palm oil, a recovered patient's pillow plumped without comment, a rooftop where 4 figures now watch dusk fade instead of 3. The twins never declared their mother forgiven. But they began saving her the crispy bits of cassava bread she liked, a small act their father recognized immediately. He started leaving his best chisel in places she could find it. Neither action required words, which meant everything could continue unspoken, at the pace their hard-won family needed. And when the next trader brought gossip about remarkable twins near the eastern marshes, nobody corrected him when he added, "Their mother helps run the workshop now." The phrase hung in the air between them, not quite true yet, not quite false anymore. Tests of forgiveness rarely end cleanly. But when tools pass freely between hands that once kept strict distance, when roof tiles bear 4 sets of footprints instead of 3, something deeper than words settles into place. The villagers would say she earned her spot. The twins would say nothing at all. But when the dry season came and the well pulley needed repairs, all 4 worked side by side, passing tools, correcting angles, solving the problem together. The pump worked better afterward than it ever had before. No one commented on this either. They didn't need to. The mother chose the dying yard again for her final revelation. This time, she brought something hidden in her sash, a brittle piece of parchment folded small enough to fit in her palm. Folktale scholars note family secrets in African traditions often appear wrapped in other objects rather than shared directly through speech. The twins sat across from her on overturned dye buckets, their father standing slightly apart near the indigo vats. "I never meant to stay gone forever," she began, uncurling the document with care. The parchment crackled at the edges, weather-beaten but preserved through years of careful storage. Forensic document analysis would later confirm it bore 17-year-old ink and the broken seal of a magistrate from 3 regions away. The twins leaned forward despite themselves. This wasn't the emotional confession they'd braced for, but something concrete from the past. The document was a labor contract. Not for hard fieldwork or domestic service, but for skilled textile work at a royal dyeing collective 2 weeks' journey west. Dated 3 months before she'd disappeared. "My uncle arranged it," she explained. Ethnographers confirm that West African families sometimes secured work contracts for younger members without full consultation, viewing economic opportunity as overriding personal choice. The first twin snatched the paper, scanning the cramped script. "You had permission to leave?" Her inflection lifted like she'd asked a completely different question. "You weren't stolen or desperate." Research on family secrets reveals how hidden paperwork often generates more confusion than concealed emotions. Official proof disrupts long-held personal narratives. Their father made a strangled noise. He'd obviously never seen this document. The mother kept her eyes on her lap where dye stains made blue shadows on her skirt. "I was supposed to send earnings home after the first season. Become someone who could provide for you properly." Cultural anthropologists note that many young mothers in patriarchal societies see economic empowerment as their only route to respected parenthood. "But you never came back," the second twin stated. Developmental psychology shows adult children often fixate on the duration of absence more than its initial cause, each year compounding the betrayal. The mother reached into her sash again and produced a second document, this one bearing a different magistrate's seal and 3 rusty nail holes where it had once been displayed publicly. A cancellation notice declaring her contract void due to moral failure. The twins' father actually recoiled from this one. Rural Nigerian court records from that era reveal such vague terms often concealed pregnancies outside marriage or refusal of superiors' advances. "I didn't abandon you," the mother whispered. "I lost the right to return honorably." Studies of migrant worker communities show how shame over failed contracts drove many into permanent displacement rather than facing families empty-handed. The first twin turned both documents over, checking for more writing. Social psychologists observe that people handed proof contradicting lifelong assumptions often search for missing pieces, assuming gaps mean deceit rather than incomplete information. "Why not explain this sooner?" The mother's answer came slowly. Researchers studying post-conflict truth commissions note that shame often silences people more effectively than fear. "I thought you'd hate me more for failing than for leaving." Silence settled thick as the indigo sludge at the bottom of the vats. The twins exchanged one of their wordless communications, just tightened jawlines and fractional head tilts. Family systems theory suggests that intensely bonded siblings develop nonverbal negotiation skills, making outsiders feel excluded even during shared silences. Their father surprised everyone by speaking first. "You could have come back when the girls were older." His tone carried no anger, just the fatigue of someone recalculating 17 years of beliefs. Migration studies indicate returned workers often face harsher judgment from spouses than children upon homecoming, partner trust being harder to rebuild than parental bonds. The second twin stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her dye bucket. "So you didn't choose to stay away forever?" "Just until, what?" "Some magical moment when we'd somehow need you less." Trauma specialists identify this reaction as classic betrayal blindness, the mind's refusal to accept that partial truths can contain both justification and failing. Neither document mentioned the twins. Not their names, not provisions for their care, just one line about prior familial obligations. The first twin traced this phrase with her fingertip, her breathing oddly measured. Legal historians note that pre-colonial African labor contracts often treated children as familial property rather than individuals requiring specific consideration. The mother seemed to shrink under their scrutiny. "I thought your father would remarry quickly. That you'd have a proper mother." Researchers studying single-parent households in rural Africa confirm that community pressure to replace absent spouses often backfires, driving remaining parents to prove self-sufficiency instead. The twins' father made a rough sound in his throat. There was never anyone else. Simple statement, complex implications about loyalty, bitterness, and choices made in absence. Quarter-inch water stains along the contract's edges suggested it had been rescued from somewhere damp, perhaps hidden under floorboards or inside a thatch roof during storms. The twins realized with sudden clarity that these brittle papers represented her sole tangible connection to them all these years. Forensic analysis of personal objects finds that migrants often preserve documents as proof they intended to return someday. The second twin handed the papers back carefully, avoiding her mother's fingers. "You should have told us when you first came back." Not forgiveness precisely, but acknowledgement that this information changed things. Behavioral psychologists note that bombshell revelations often create temporary numbness before emotions fully engage. Their father did something unexpected then. He reached for the contracts and examined them himself. Not suspiciously, but with the focused attention of someone verifying an old puzzle's missing pieces. Marriage counselors observe that betrayed spouses often need tactile engagement with proof before recalibrating long-held narratives. The workshop bell rang, some apprentice needing direction, but all four ignored it. Micro-expressions flickered across the twins' faces too fast to name. Studies on family reconciliation show that major revelations often land differently across generations. Parents process logistical implications while children grapple with identity shifts. "So you didn't leave because we were too much," the first twin said finally, more statement than question. Developmental psychologists identify this as a key milestone for abandoned children, separating parents' limitations from their own worthiness. The mother shook her head hard enough to dislodge tears. "I left because I thought someday I could give you more." Research on migrant mothers shows many sincerely believe prolonged absence will ultimately benefit children through remittances or elevated social status upon return. The second twin scraped her sandal against a cracked tile, leftover frustration with no clear outlet now. "All those starving seasons, we thought you just didn't care." Behavioral economists note that childhood deprivation often wires the brain to prioritize evidence of scarcity over potential abundance. Their father broke the silence this time by doing something extraordinarily ordinary. He handed the documents back to her with a stiff nod before walking toward the workshop disturbance. Not forgiveness, but cessation of active rejection. Relationship studies show small cooperative acts often precede emotional reconciliation by weeks or months. The mother refolded the contracts with trembling hands. Unlike cinematic reveals where truth instantly heals wounds, reality brought only awkward quiet. The twins remained seated, watching afternoon sun warp the parchment's shadows against the ground. Truth and reconciliation researchers stress that most breakthroughs merely create conditions for eventual forgiveness rather than delivering it prepackaged. Practical concerns broke the tension first: the need to check glaze temperatures at the pottery shed, an incoming shipment requiring signatures. The twins stood together, their synchronized movements highlighting how much history existed without her. Family systems theory suggests reintegration shocks occur when the absent member realizes existing relationships have evolved irreversibly without them. The mother didn't try to stop them leaving. She just exhaled roughly and pressed the folded contracts to her forehead, a gesture cultural anthropologists recognize as traditional apology in several West African communities when words feel inadequate. That evening, the village noticed 4 figures watching sunset from the workshop roof instead of 3. No dramatic embrace occurred, just proximity maintained while focusing on the horizon rather than each other. Social scientists call this parallel presence, a neutral coexistence that sometimes precedes deeper connection. Later, when the twins inventoried supplies near their mother's guest hut doorway, they found she'd left both documents on the stoop weighted with a river stone, placed exactly where they'd see them upon exiting, reclaiming them or walking past as they chose. Psychologists note that offering control over painful information often achieves what emotional appeals cannot. The twins took the contracts inside. They spent hours examining every mark, the magistrate's uneven seal, water stains forming vague continent shapes, even a single brown hair caught in the fold that might have been hers or a clerk's or anyone's. Forensic experts emphasize how tactile engagement with artifacts facilitates acceptance of associated truths. Neither twin voiced forgiveness that night. But when they retired, they didn't refold and return the documents to her. They placed them carefully in their father's old chest where he kept birth records and marriage papers, a symbolic filing alongside other family proofs. Archivists would recognize this as classic reconciliation behavior, integrating once separate records into unified systems. The mother noticed the next morning when she found the chest unlatched and her documents visible atop folded linens. She didn't touch them, just smoothed her hands over the wood grain before latching it again quietly. Social workers observed that some family reconciliations happen entirely through such gestures, unspoken acknowledgments that certain truths now live in shared spaces. Work continued normally that day, no grand pronouncements, no tearful embraces behind the dye vats. But the twins didn't stop their mother when she adjusted a poorly balanced loom shuttle, though they normally corrected anyone touching their designs. And she didn't hesitate when handing them tools mid-project, though she'd previously waited for explicit requests. Cultural historians would later classify this as classic West African conflict resolution, where reintegration happens through resumed productivity rather than verbal processing. The village elders recognized the shift too. By week's end, they stopped referring to her as their mother returned and simply used her given name again, linguistic normalization being community permission to move forward. When the next trader brought news of the twins' irrigation projects, he added absent-mindedly, "Their parents oversee quality control now." The twins didn't correct him. Their father poured the man extra palm wine. Their mother kept her eyes on her stitching, but her fingers moved smoother than they had in weeks. Truth rarely mends broken things instantly. But in the workshop's steady rhythms, the rasp of saws, the scrape of grinding stones, the occasional shared laughter over mistakes, something more durable than forgiveness took root, shared purpose that acknowledged the past without being chained to it. 3 weeks after the revelations, heavy rains flooded the river paths. The twins worked alongside their parents to reinforce the retaining walls, for figures moving in efficient synchrony, passing tools, and shifting stones without needing words. Neighbors watching from higher ground noticed how the mother anticipated the twins' needs before requests formed, and how the twins adjusted their usual patterns to incorporate her strengths. Nobody called this forgiveness. Nobody needed to. When the 4 walked home muddy and exhausted, the twins broke their usual silent supper rule to describe next season's expansion plans, including their mother in the conversation for the first time. Their father stirred the pot with extra vigor, coughing to cover some suspicious throat clearing. And late that night when the workshop lamps dimmed, careful observers might have noticed 4 shadows moving behind the shuttered windows, close enough now to occasionally bump elbows while working, but still carefully negotiating the space between who they'd been and who they might become together. The final revelation hadn't fixed everything, but it had given them all enough common ground to keep building upon. Maybe that was all families needed, not perfect resolution, just enough truth to continue forward together.